Oh, what's good, my Menace Society? It is your host with the most, Shadow Loke, back at you with another video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. That is how you help my channel get into the algorithm. Highly appreciate you go to do that. Now, I was asked, I was having a discussion with one of my subscribers, right? And he was talking about, would I watch channels if I knew, like, the channel of the individual on the channel was no good? If he had defected or dropped out or snitched or anything like that, right? And I said, just from my personal, stand, no. And he said, but when you said about, not bringing the gangster, element onto the internet, wouldn't that be considered like bringing the gangster element to the internet in itself, right? And I would say no, because it's not like we're coming on here and we're going back and forth with these individuals or insulting these individuals because they are, or they ended up the way they ended up. You know what I mean? We're not acknowledging none of that. We're not even, feeding into it or paying attention to it. Now, I just wouldn't watch for my personal reasons, right? Like our, views don't line up. So I just don't see, what would be, the purpose if our views don't line up, to watch the content, right? And another thing, about individuals, when we're talking about like topics like this, is that it's not so much that, people are, or people dislike these individuals because of what they have, became, or what they decided to do, roll it up, turn to no good snitch or whatever the hell, right? It's the fact that individuals come on the internet and try to leech off of something that they no longer wanted to be a part of. That's the reason why they rolled it up, why they became no good, why they snitched, why they debriefed, why they, turned their back on the life, right? They wanted nothing to do with the life no more, no association with the life no more. That's why they ended up on the other side. They are no good. Even for the ones that got pushed out, right? So, you are no longer in the mix. And it's accepted by them, right? So this life, they don't want nothing to do with this life no more and stuff like that, right? But they're going to come on the internet and choose to constantly be speaking about the life and talking about, all this gangster, agendas and gangster info and, stuff that clearly they wanted no association with. Clearly they didn't want nothing to do with the life, yet, because they could get some money off of it, here they are, leeching. You know what I'm saying? At the convenience, they want to play, like they're gangster, or, now it's cool to be gangster all over again, right? Or now it's cool for them to play the role, pretend, because individuals like those kind of individuals, to me, were never gangsters. They were con artists, con men, and a con knows how to play the game, right? A con will lead people to believe, to think that he was a gangster when he truly wasn't. He was a con artist playing his, natural gift, right? A con, playing the role, pretending, gimmicks, trying to fit in, whenever, like I said, trying to fit in whenever they could get something out of it, right? Whenever it's beneficial to these type of individuals. That's why these individuals always tend to be people that roll it up and, decide to flip, because it was never about the hood. It was always about themselves and themselves only. And that's just the reality of things, that because if these individuals were to come on here, right, on social media, and they were to have channels about, let's say, anything, fixing cars, educational, cooking, movie reviews, nobody would be calling them out on anything, and nobody would be telling these individuals anything. What would they call them out on? Nothing, right? Because they're not talking and injecting themselves in the gangster world, in the gangster, info, and the gangster drama of things, right? Because they no longer want to be associated with that. So now they're just living their life. so people wouldn't be able to hop on the channel and be like, oh, you're a dropout or you're a snitch. If for what reason would they tell them that if they're not even having no type of discussion that has anything to do with the gangster world, right? Because they no longer want to be associated with that. So nobody would have any problems with these individuals, you know? And, you know, would I watch the channels if they were not to be talking about like the gangster world? Well, yeah, why not? You know what I mean? They're not talking about, stuff that has to do with, no gangster, elements to it. It's once they try to inject themselves in the gangster talk and try to, act like they, in the mix is where the problems come in, Um, it's when they try to, like, why are you trying to, play the part for? That's where the problems lie in. So it's not even so much about the whole, it's how they go about it, but they try to act like they're doing it for some righteous reason or some noble cause. The con keeps going, right? This is the with no shame, happens to be the worst ones. You get what I'm saying? But that's where the problems happen, and that's where you get a lot of these people getting grilled, on here when it comes to YouTube. But like I said, people just can't, I guess, see that, right? Maybe because they believe that they're actually in it for this noble cause. Who knows? Or maybe they just like the entertainment, but the entertainment doesn't now allow people to now come and manipulate, lie, and con their way into the mix. That's just not how it works. Anywhere in anything. You get what I'm saying? So it's not so much, that's the only real issue that, is with when it comes to those kind of individuals, is that I can see what they're trying to do, and I can see them for what they are, but it's not something that I would come on here and try to discredit them or try to get people to not view their channels, or you get what I'm saying? Because it really isn't that serious. And like I said, all that stuff is left for the streets. And why we say that kind of stuff when it comes to these type of individuals when they are no longer associated from the streets is that they're injecting themselves within this matter, right? That's why those types of things are still said, because they're still involving themselves in the mix. So you know what I mean? Unfortunately, that comes with the game. The best way to not get eaten by the lions is not to jump into the lion's den. Stay away from the lion's den. You won't get eaten. But it's once you choose to roam around and, stick your foot in there, then you can't be mad once the lions start to bite. That's just the way it works. So when it comes to these individuals, it's not so much that it's like with the whole gangbang. Like I said, they're the ones that are, stirring the pot and bringing this upon themselves and want to cry victims. You know what I mean? Now people be like, well, what if they're just talking about their personal life experiences? That's all fine and dandy, but see, the thing is that they don't. Maybe that's how they started off, or maybe, they'll throw tell here and there, but 9 times out of 10, they're always, talking about other shit that's not even related to them, right? Which they have no part in speaking on, because they are no longer a part of that life. Less than a civilian, because the civilian never flipped, or never, said that he's done with this and cooperated, right? So they even have less than the right than a civilian. You know what I mean? And that's just the reality of things. And the reason why they choose to withhold this information, or the reason why they choose to act like, they didn't cooperate, like, calling other people snitches when they themselves have cooperated, right? Or, poking fun of other people for being in prisons in yards that are, less than level 4, when they have programmed in these types of yards, these sensitive need yards themselves, but they want to make fun of other people for the same thing. That is crazy. You get what I mean? Like trying to come off as, real thuggish, real gangster. They only been in the hardest yards and the, the highest of levels, and only been in the deepest of mix, right? And only rolled with the shystest and hardest and toughest gangsters that there ever was. When in actual reality, that was never about none of that. You know, they played the part. They lived off of other people's stories. Shit, some people have no shame and just full blown invent the stories themselves. I should know, you know. Keep in mind that at one point I did, you know, in the beginning, before I knew any of it, I did conversate with some of these individuals, right? So I actually know the real get down when it comes to some of these individuals, right? So I actually know what they're really about, right? It's how deep some of their lives go, you know. Some people would actually be surprised of how full of shit some people really are on here, you know. And I mean, like, with no shame. So it's not like we're just speaking like from the outs, you know, looking in. No, we're speaking from, you know, actual personal inside info. You know what I mean? So it's not like we're hating. We're just speaking merely truth, facts about things, right? Not so much about going into the gangster topic or like into, you know, specific stories of their criminal activities and stuff like that. You get what I mean? But like I said, because they're the ones that open the can of worms, but then want to cry victims. So it has nothing to do with, you know, bringing the whole gangster thing onto the internet. You know what I mean? They themselves do that themselves, right? You know, because you can't really tell somebody what they can and can't watch, and you actually don't know what people watch in their personal time. You know, to try to regulate what people can watch and can't watch, right? So it's not. It has nothing to do with you can't watch these individuals because you're active and they're non-active. You know what I mean? Shit. People, some of people's favorite movies are movies like American Me, right? Which was a movie that was essentially, you know, gathered by dropouts. You know, people who had fell off in that life, and you know, spoke about events, and people seem to love that movie, right? And well, that's like you're supporting, you know, people who told and all of that. When people be like, "Oh, well, see, I wouldn't watch that if I was, you know, active." Like, but yeah, you say one of your favorite movies is American Me. You know, where do you think that they got the concept of, you know, the background to those stories, right? Informants, people that fell off. You know, their retelling of the stories, not to the exact dot, right? But I mean, so technically, you know what I mean? That's why when it comes to trying to control what people can and can't watch, I just don't watch because it's my choice, my preference, you know? It doesn't appeal to me, you know, because our views just don't line up. So therefore, I just don't see why, you know. But not to say that people have to do that or have to follow those rules. That's just my personal choice, you know, and not because it makes you more gangster or nothing like that. Oh, that's dumb and goofy. But overall, that's just my breakdown on the matter. You know, wanted to, you know, come and because I don't think, you know, he was understanding what I was saying, right? So just to make that clear. And he did mention something I did want to mention also too. He had said, why do you support trolls like, you know, Chemo Flix, right? Like, what gives him credentials to speak on these individuals' gangster cards, right? Like, where has he been? And the thing is, he never comes and tells any of these individuals anything, right? He merely highlights these individuals' very own words. You can't be mad at him for that. You know what I mean? He's not saying that he's more gangster than them or that he's been to harder yards or he's trying to hold them to a gangster card. He's merely saying that he's using their own words. Look, you're hypocrites because you're saying one thing and then over here you're saying a different, right? It's like, be what you say you are, you know? You know, that's all he does is highlight. People have never even heard the individual speak. So how can you say that, you know, he's a troll, whatever? And like I said, I don't need to come and defend him or act like if I'm defending him, right? I just find that, you know, funny that how people could be so furious at him for merely just highlighting those things. But that's just my opinions. What are your thoughts? Leave in the comments. Chat away up.